Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second quarter of Practical Research 2. This is our workshop number 1. Today, we will discuss the 4 competencies, and these are the following: chooses appropriate quantitative research design, describes sampling procedure and sample, constructs an instrument and establishes its validity and reliability, and describes intervention. But before we will delve into the discussion of those competencies, we will listen to a presentation provided by the Filipino Science Hub. They are scientists and experts in doing scientific research. So in this video, they will share to us things about introduction and review of related literature. So this video will serve as a review of the things that transpired in the first quarter of our subject. So here is the video provided by our scientist.
Kung pinagkaiba nun sa IMRAD. Pero I think technically it should just be the same. I mean, hindi ko alam kung merong special section sila. Anyways. Alright. So, mapunta tayo dito sa sa inihanda ko. Asan ba ako? medyo na-trigger ako doon. Alam niyo na po, para ako si Tulfo. Pag na-trigger, kung ano ang mga pinagsasasabi. But ito yung approach po natin yung araw na ito. Hold your horses. I will present case study na kaparehas lang din po nung ginamit natin example kahapon. Yung case study natin kahapon was gold nanoparticles. We're trying to come up with size and shape uniform nanoparticles na hopefully cheap ang production. And we're gonna be exploring yung anti-cancer properties niya. So, ang gagawin po natin, pagsusulat tayo ng pahapyaw ng report out of this case study. Alright? So, we're gonna course through all the parts and then magbibigay ako ng tips and best practices. Alright. Basic structure of a research report. So, yung nabanggit na kanina, ito yung siguro basic and most common structure of a research report. Andito, so you've got your abstract and then yung sinabi na kanina sa chat box na IMRAD. So, you've got your introduction, your methods, and then your results and discussion, and then your conclusions. And then may pinakita ako dito sa dulo. I grade out the font na optionally, when you are writing up a research report, you may offer or recommend some feature work. And then I grade out, but this is not optional. Kailangan din, of course, yung references. Though hindi siya isinama dun sa IMRAD, non-negotiable, kailangan meron kayong references. And what I also did here was I highlighted certain parts that would make up different types of report that we write as we tackle a research project. So, sa simula, like when you are choosing a topic, refining it, establishing the context upon which you are doing your research, and making the relevance or importance of your research clear, and planning like your approach to prove or disprove your hypothesis or to answer your research questions. Yung first parts po na yan, yung abstract, introduction, and methods, those are all parts of a research proposal. So you have to I might be preaching to the choir. But then, after you implement your research project, and you start generating data, analyzing it, then you are naturally moving into the downstream steps of your project, which is gathering up the results and discussing, so essentially interpreting it. And then of course at the end of it, we strive to offer conclusions based on the data that we generated. At kapag nakompleto nyo na yung buong project na yan, a process na yan, at sinulat nyo na, that's what constitutes a research report. Alright. Okay, so may mga labels tayo dyan no, ng sections na binanggit ko. But then, ano pa talaga yan? So abstract, it's an overview. Introduction, ang focus ng introduction is to really establish your research questions. What are you trying to answer through your study? Yung methods naman, it actually speaks about your study approach. So how? How are you implementing your research project for you to gather data to answer your research questions? Your results naman are the findings from your experimentation. Discussion is the interpretation of your findings or interpretation of your results. Conclusion essentially is the answer to the research questions that you posed in the beginning of your research project. And then future work, like I said, recommended path forward. Like hypothetically speaking, if people would pick up on the work that you actually left behind, ano ba yung logical next steps na pwede nilang gawin to further build on what you did or to enrich the body of knowledge that you yourself had established through your research project. Alright? And then, kahapon po, I tackled review of literature. Ang gusto ko pong i-highlight ninyo sa mga estudyante nyo is, you do review the literature at all steps of your research project. Bakit ko ba sinabi that review of literature is life? Unang-una, when you're writing up your introduction and you're formulating your research questions, obviously you're asking those questions because you're not an expert. So meaning you have to draw inspiration from what other people have actually done and you're using their insights as basis for your hypothesis. When it comes to your methods or your study approach, napakabihira na po sa panahong ito that people are building up or developing their own methodologies from scratch. Like we usually adapt or leverage methods or standard ways of doing things done by our predecessors. So kaya, like kang pupunta sa literature, sa halip na mag-design ka ng bago, instead of recreating the wheel, are there well-established and well-documented protocols out there that you can use for you to perform your research in the most resource-efficient manner. So yun, so meaning, kailangan mo rin magbasa. Ano na ba nagawa nila? Ano ba yung pwede kong gayahin? Alright. And then when it comes to your results and finding, like how you process the data and how you interpret the data, you can also take inspiration from how other people are doing it. Most especially those who did very similar experiments or who employed the very similar methodologies that you implemented. So yun po, pwede nyo rin gayahin yung approach nila. And then when it comes to the discussion, as you interpret your data and you start drawing conclusions based on your experimental results, like the only way by which you can really validate it is to also compare and contrast it with what's been proven or what's been reported out there. So meaning, kahit sa pag-interpret mo ng sarili mong results, you'll be able to establish confidence in your conclusion if you are going to, again, ikukumpara ninyo sa kung anong nagawa na nung iba na nauna sa inyo. Alright? Hindi yung, ay nakakuha ko ng data at original to. Even to prove that your work is original, you have to read up the literature. Kasi kailangan sure ka na, I have actually searched far and wide. Wala akong nakitang kaparehas nito. So yun, so even yung pag-claim na original yun, you have to back it up with the literature. Or even if you claim that this is an improvement, paano may i-claim na improvement yun kung wala kang pagkukumparahan? So kaya po, dapat klaro po sa inyo, kasi ito din napansin ko again, parang, sir, nag-review ako ng literature, tapos parang sa dulo ginawa. Sakala nagre-review ng literature, pagpatapos na, pagsusulatin na yung research, ay, nako, tapos saka na lang ma-figure out na, ay, ginawa namin yung experiment, tapos nagawa na pala siya. O, di ba, nasayang yung ilang buwan mo, nasayang yung ilang taon mo. Kaya po dapat, you have to make it clear to your students that sa lahat ng step ng scientific research project na gagawin nila, they have to be constantly reading up the literature, just to make sure na nakakakuha sila ng guidance from other people's work kung tama ba yung ginagawa nila. Kung may kinakapuntahan ba yung ginagawa nila. Alright, and then, naturally, yung sinabi ko sa pag-interpret ng data, you need to contextualize your data and your claims based off of the literature. The same holds true with, like with drawing your conclusions. Ganon din po yung kailangan may pagkukumparahan ka para maging solid at kung ka mas madaling ma-validate yung results mo. Alright? Okay. Meron po bang tanong so far? Mukhang asan ba yan?
Ito, may tanong dito from Janice. Ano po ba ang dapat i-present sa PowerPoint presentation during proposal or final defense?
Asan yung question na yun, JP?
Yung last.
Yung last.
Okay. In a PowerPoint, okay, ano ba ang dapat lang i-present during proposal or final defense? Actually po yung approach dyan,
it depends on the time limit. Kasi para kung binigyan ka lang na 15 minutes, ibig sabihin, only the general conclusions or yung
Yes.
mga pertinent details lang. So, the level of detail depends.
and alam mo, if you would
Yeah.
observe a lot of presentations, kasi ang tendency ng mga tao, I have 1 hour. So, therefore, 60 slides.
Mhm.
So, pero in practice po, sa totoo lang, you'd spend 2 to 5 minutes voicing over a slide. So, kung 15 minutes lang yun, technically, kung proposal yan, 15 minutes lang yung time mo to speak, essentially giving a pitch, di technically 3 to 4 slides lang yun. So, if you're presenting your proposal, then unang slide mo should talk about your motivation. Ano ba yung state of the art? Ano yung kulang? Right? And then your second section should focus on your research or on your research questions and then your hypothesis. So ito yung research questions ko, ito yung na-observe namin based on a review of literature. So therefore, ito yung mga sasagutin namin, right? And then yung third part nun should actually focus on your study approach. Ano ba yung una mong mga gagawin to prove your point? And ito lalong-lalo na sa research proposal writing and presentation. Ano ba yung indication that you have a good enough proposal? Ito, sinabi ko po dun sa webinar namin on proposal writing. A high-quality proposal is clear, focused, and actionable. Pag sinabi pong actionable, pag tinanong ka ng panel mo, sige, simulan mo na bukas, ano yung unang mong experiment na gagawin? Kapag hindi mo yun nasagot, medyo, wali pa yung proposal mo. So, dapat ganun kaklaro yun. So, kahit 3 slides lang yan, yung ipipresent mo, dapat klaro sa kanila, oh, okay, she has a good starting point. But then, okay, sa proposal po, by the way, you also should not expect na na-figure out nyo lahat na isang taon ko itong gagawin from steps A to Z ay naplano ko na. Hindi po ganun. Kasi research comes with a lot of failure and surprises. So sometimes you have to pivot. Pero ang kailangan po, makita nila yung conceptual framework that this is the approach that makes sense right now. Alright? At kung ang expectation ng mga advisor nyo po ay you should have figured everything out, I am telling you, your advisor is inexperienced. Hindi nila alam ang mga sinasabi nila. Kapag ganon, you can only plan for a starting point. You can never predict the future and your outcomes. So you have to keep optimizing. You know, you improve as you go. Ayan. Alright. Sabi ni Sir Wayne, is it necessary to exhaust all related literature in the review? Sir, hindi naman po natin kailangan basahin lahat. But then siguro yung magbibigay ako ng tips mamaya. You have to make sure that kung kilala nyo po yung mga top people and most reputable people in the field, at the very least, cover nyo po yung mga na-report nila dun sa area na yon. Kasi more likely po, if they are the leading figures in your field, kapag hindi nila na-cover yung ginagawa mo, then possibly merong novelty yung pinopropose mo, for example. And yun yung magandang way para i-benchmark. And more likely po, if you're publishing your paper, yung mga experts po na yan din ang mga unang-unang magre-react. Ayan. So, sila yung unang mag-challenge sa inyong mga sinasabi. Alright? Okay. So, okay. Abstract. So, abstract, like I said, is an overview. Ito lang yung tip po. Ito, practical tip na ibinibigay ko po sa inyo. So, when you write up your abstract, technically, may tatlong sections lang po yan. So, you have to state a very brief background of your study. So, what problem needs to be solved and what has been done before. Ganon kasimple. 1 to 2 sentences. Problem statement. Doon sa abstract niyo, dapat klarong-klaro kayo. Ano ba talaga specifically yung gagawin niyo sa project ninyo? And then third, key results and findings. So by the way, this is research report. So we're assuming na nagawa na natin yung project. Tapos na tayo sa proposal stage. So you have to summarize key results and conclusions of your study. And then yung tip lang po, dapat po less than 300 words yung length ng abstract ninyo. So isipin nyo yung term. Are you guys familiar with the term elevator pitch? So for example, hypothetically, pumunta kayo ng DOST, sumakay kayo, may bibisitahin kayong lab, sumakay kayo sa elevator, tapos nakasalubong nyo yung DOST secretary. And yung DOST secretary has the ability to actually fund your research or siguro fund yung attendance po sa conference where you can present the results of your study. So, doon sa elevator ride na yun, typically, you would only have like 1 to 2 minutes to speak about your research and convince the DOST secretary that, hey, you should actually hear about my research and support it. No? So, ang goal sa pagsulat ng abstract is, this is your pitch. If you're only given 1 to 2 minutes to speak about your research, dapat yung abstract mo, ma-deliver mo within the very short period of time. So that is how concise your abstract should be. So doon sa context po ng ating example, ng ating case study about like nanoparticles for anti-cancer research, pwede yung pitch mo is like, hey, Mr. Secretary, I'm actually doing research developing metal nanoparticles as anti-cancer drugs. Since this is an emerging area and we need new technologies because cancer has been a leading cause of death around the world. And so specifically what I did was I identified cost-effective ways of preparing gold nanoparticles, and then we did like we studied the effect of size and morphology in its anti-cancer activities in mice. And we were successful in establishing a cheap and light-mediated synthesis of gold nanoparticles in water, and our in vivo studies in mice revealed that 5 to 10 nanometer spherical gold nanoparticles were effective anti-cancer agents. So yun, tapos, so within a minute or two, na-deliver mo. Dapat po ganyan yung abstract. So, and I know challenging yan, lalong-lalo na po kapag, again, marami kang ginawa sa project mo, parang feeling mo, hindi pa dapat ilalagay ko karamihan ng mga ginawa ko dun sa abstract. So, hindi po. Again, overview lang, you should be focusing on highlights. Alright? Highlights lang because you don't have the time. And then most importantly, bakit ba tayo nagsusulat ng abstract? Nagsusulat tayo ng abstract kasi yun yung unang babasahin when people see your report in a conference, anong tawag sa conference, ano na yan, book, proceedings. Ayan, ang tagal ko na ang tagal ko na pong hindi nagpe-present sa conferences. I'm losing my terms. Conference proceedings or kahit po sa academic journals. Hindi naman po sila yung magbabasa from introduction hanggang dulo. Abstract muna. Kasi that's the fastest way for them to figure out if what you actually did is interesting to them. So kung papalya kayo sa pagsusulat ng abstract, unang-una, from a paper reviewing perspective, sabi nga po ni Dr. Hibas, kapag yung una pa lang sentences ng paper mo ay hindi na nagko-communicate ng quality at walang clarity, your abstract does not drive for clarity, hindi ma-approve. Kasi wala namang masyadong time ang lahat ng mga tao. Alright. Okay. Introduction. So ito, conceptual framework, pinahapyawan ko na to kahapon. So ano ba yung nandun sa introduction? So an introduction presents the study context and motivation. Pinasadahan natin yan. And essentially, ano ba yung context na yan? Yun yung background na sinasabi natin. An introduction explains relevant theories and knowledge, provides related developments that help establish your research questions. So, dito na papasok na, ano ba yung naging basehan ng hypothesis mo? Ano ba yung observations mo first hand? Ano yung observations ng iba based on the literature that you read? And then third, and very importantly, sa introduction, sa dulo niyan, you're actually stating your research objectives, what specifically are you trying to achieve in your project, and then and also importantly, the scope. Okay, so ano ba yung scope? So scope meaning, ano lang ba yung aaralin mo dun sa project mo? So it's very important to discuss what your research will cover, but then it is also equally important to express ano yung hindi mo gagawin. Okay? And this is very important po sa proposal stage pa lang, sanayan niyo yung students niyo na dapat nakalista ano lang yung gagawin nila, ano yung aspects or ano yung questions na hindi nila pwedeng sagutin kasi limited ang resources, limited ang expertise, limited ang time. Okay? Kapag wala kayong scope, mahihirapan kayong mag-implement ng inyong research project. Dapat klaro hanggang saan lang ang gagawin niyo. Okay? Meron po bang nakaka-relate dyan? Ayan. So, dapat klaro-klaro po yan. And this is very important sa proposal stage. Okay. We're gonna get down to the example. So, background. Again, ito yung mga questions na pinakita ko kahapon. Tungkol saan ba yung research? Gamitin nyo yung mga inaral ng iba to establish the importance of what you're doing. And, to establish na what they call this, to help better paint the problem that you're trying to solve. So, gamitin nyo yung reports ng iba. So, as an example, and again, this is not a full-blown introduction. Pinapakitaan ko lang po kayo na technically, ito yung mga kailangan mong i-establish, ito yung mga information na kailangan mong ilagay. And then, I'm just like, adding bullet points para ma-indicate sa inyo na, ay, ito yung mga posibleng pagkakasulat depende dun sa case study na ginawa natin. So you can start by talking about cancer and like how it remains to be a leading cause of death. And then deductive, yung reasoning natin dito from very broad concept, ang goal ng introduction is to narrow it down to your research question. So meaning, you talk about cancer, a very broad area, and then yung next part niyan, you're gonna discuss anti-cancer treatment. So naturally, nagpo-focus na siya na, okay, what about cancer are you trying to study? So it's anti-cancer treatment. And then from anti-cancer treatment, you're narrowing it down to a specific class of anti-cancer agents, which are nanoparticles. So diba, so within your first couple of paragraphs, nafo-focus na yung attention or yung topic onto a specific area. Yun po yung ginagawa natin dyan. At yun din yung dapat yung ituro sa mga estudyante nyo na baka mamaya ay broad concept tapos mag-narrow down tapos babalik na naman sa broad concept. Dyan nyo po makikita na yung pagsulat ng intro at saka yung review ng literature parang pinasok ko lang yung kung ano-ano just like for the heck of coming up with a page worth of words. So, hindi po yan. Again, you're coming up with a story. Okay, so the beginning of the introduction introduces the background, and then typically we dedicate like a couple of paragraphs to further expound on your context. Ano ba yung mga conventional knowledge and state-of-the-art systems in that research area that motivated your interest and then also led you to your research question. So again, ang goal nyo kasi dito establish, ano ba yung bago sa ginagawa ko? Or ano yung idadagdag nitong ginagawa ko dun sa area of research na napili ninyo. So what makes your study unique and important? Okay, so example dito. So several studies indicate na yung size uniform daw na transition metals are effective anti-cancer drugs. And then, recent advances showed na itong process, yung pag-produce ng mga nanoparticles na to, pwede itong maging mura kasi historically mahal yung process nila. Alright? So again, yung introduction, yung first part nyo talked about anti-cancer drugs, and then now you're talking about a specific type of, or a specific attribute of nanoparticles, so size and uniformity of shape. And then after that, pupunta ka naman dun sa, okay, a very critical aspect of those size and shape uniform nanoparticles is mahal. So, segue ka naman dun sa, merong recent advances na mura yung approach. So again, mas pa-narrow ng pa-narrow yung context ng discussion. Alright. And then sa dulo naman ito, sa dulo ng introduction nyo, you have to state your hypothesis and your study scope. So, this study did this and did that to establish this objective or to validate this hypothesis. And then, again, sinabi ko, state what your problem or what your research will cover or will not cover. Alright. Ito yung example. So, you can state your study objective in the context of this case study na this study explored the synthesis of size uniform gold nanoparticles and their evaluation as anti-cancer drugs. And the study focused on, yung sinabi ko kanina, cost-efficient synthesis methods of 5 to 10 nanometer gold nanoparticles and testing their anti-cancer properties in mice. So doon pa lang, kitang-kita nyo na ay, nag-focus lang sila dun sa 5 to 10 nanometers at saka yung anti-cancer efficacy study na ginawa nila ay sa daga. Alright, hindi sa tao. So again, pag binasa nila yan, yung introduction nyo pa lang ay klaro na what to expect. Kung ano yung ginawa nila, kung ano yung gagawin nila.
Okay, so that is the things that you need to remember in doing or writing your introduction. So I hope this time you're done doing your background and review of related literature, as well as you have written your hypothesis and study scope. So I hope those things will be applied in the revision of your introduction. Since we are done with the introduction, let us proceed with methods, diba? At the end of this discussion, at the end of the workshops, you will present your paper in IMRAD. Introduction, methods, result, and discussion. So in this time, we will proceed with the methods. First competency, we will choose the appropriate quantitative research design. So what do you think is the research design in doing science investigatory project? Okay, we are doing the experimental research design. Describing sampling, procedure, and sample. Since we are having experiments, we have the following parts. So the methodology is the part of our research paper that explains the procedures in collecting and analyzing data and also describes the sources of our data. So in writing scientific paper, introduction, method, result, and discussion format is usually used as structure, and methodology becomes the materials and methods. M stands for materials and methods. As the name implies, it describes the materials and methods of the study. So figure 1 shows the comparison of manuscript format and methodology. So we have 3 different formats for varied types of research. So if your study focus on biology, you will have this manuscript format. So you will have content for collection of specimen, the identification of specimen, extraction and treatment preparation such as homogenation, biosafety level, assay testing, randomization, the data collection, answer the specific research questions. So, how will you answer the specific research questions? So, you will discuss in your data collection. Next, data analysis and the disposal of your experiment. So, those were the specific parts of the material and methods for biology-related studies. Next, if you are doing innovation, you will have the following: planning and design, collection and construction, testing the device, data collection, and data analysis. So, this is applicable to the innovation category, robotics category, and I think it can be also applied to physical science category. Next, descriptive research. If you are doing descriptive studies, you will have purpose and research design, sampling and sample, construction of instrument, validity and reliability of instrument, data gathering procedure, collection and construction, testing the device, data collection and specific research questions, data analysis. Okay? So those were the manuscript for different types of studies. Let us proceed with this table here. The key element in writing a comprehensive methodology and the materials and methods parts of the manuscript is adapted from already proven standard methods. So you research for a proven standard method to apply to your study. This means that the method should be cited. If ever there are changes from the standardized method, then there is a need to be specifying it in your manuscript. However, if the highlight of the study is simplification or innovation in the process, then such changes should be noted. For invention, the process or method should be new and it would show the inventive steps. So, if your study focuses on innovation and invention, so you should highlight the process and the method that are novel and new. You should show those inventive steps. So, here we can see the table. This is a biology-related study, the antibacterial activity. So, antibacterial activity of Origanum vulgare crude, methanolic extract on Staphylococcus aureus. So, we have different treatments. Treatment 1, treatment 2, treatment 3, treatment 4. So, different treatments yields the diameter zone of inhibition. Significance level is 0.05 alpha. Okay? So, that is the example of doing your experiment, designing the process, the treatments that you will do on your study. Of course, adapted from the standardized method. You can cite the method that you will use. Of course, if there are changes, you indicate the changes, and if it is original or new, you state it that your method is new, a new process or a simplification of those process. Next, if you are doing descriptive study, you can construct instrument such as survey. If you're doing social research or action research, you can adopt or create instruments such as survey form, then if you made your instrument, you need to establish its validity and reliability. So you will consult evaluators to evaluate your created survey form or your created instrument. But if your instrument is adapted from another source, there's no need for validity and reliability if the instruments are adapted. But if it is original or you are the one who created your instrument, you need to seek for its validity and reliability. Therefore, you will go to various experts for the evaluation of your research instruments. And if it is an action research, if there is an intervention, you describe your intervention if applicable to your study. So here, we will view a video that discusses the methods, the methodology of your research. So again, it is from the Philippine Science Hub. So they are scientists and experts who have done various researches, and they are the one who will share to us the things that we need to remember in writing out our materials and methods.
Experimental design part. So thank you, Doc Jeff. And I don't have a title slide for introduction slide for myself, but I'll just quickly introduce myself here. So my name is JP Onya. I'm a Filipino scientist based here in Finland right now. I'm working for a research facility here in Finland in the bandang norte na po, so pa North Pole na ako. But
Santa Claus.
Yeah. So I'm also a chemist by training. I graduated from UPLB, and I did my master's here in Europe, first in Estonia and then in Finland, and then I did my PhD. I'm still finishing my PhD, but I'm currently working right now. And my research interests include catalysis, specifically electrocatalysis, and anything electrochemistry. I'm designing sensors right now, electrochemical sensors for different metals and biological molecules. So I'm here today to discuss the experimental design part, and marami na tayong nakuha na insights from Doc Jeff about ideation and literature review. And at this point, probably may idea na tayo on how to come up with a sound research question sa kung ano yung gusto nating talakayin or tuklasin dun sa ating research project, and specifically state what our research objectives are. And for the experimental design, this is very important part of the research process, because your research question and research objective may be very sound and perfectly sounding, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So a lot of great ideas fail into execution dahil nga yung experimental design is not really fit or may mga lacking aspects dun sa experimentation. So that's what we're gonna tackle today. So, but before I move on discussing about experimental design further, I'd just like to introduce the different types of quantitative research. And at this webinar, so nakafocus lang po muna tayo sa quantitative research. There's also qualitative research, which is done in the humanities, arts, humanities and social sciences. So, iba pong realm yun ng ng research, it's qualitative. But what we are dealing here is numbers, numerical values. That's why it's quantitative research. So there are four common types of quantitative research. One is descriptive research, which merely describes conditions and characteristics of a certain population or a sample of that population. So take, for example, the population of students in the Philippines, take a subset of that and describe the statistics from that subset. So it merely describes, so dito pumapasok yung tinatawag descriptive statistics, mean, median, mode ng iyong data. So sabihin natin na parang it's a very simple type of research, but it is very important because it lays the ground of what is the status quo of a certain problem. So wag po nating mamaliin yung descriptive research kasi it builds the foundation on the actual problem that we need to solve. There's also correlational research, which identifies a relationship between two or more variables without manipulating them. So you have a set of, let's say, two sets of data, and you want to know if there is correlation or relationship between those variables. So this is what correlational research is for. But at this point, wala po tayong ni-introduce na control or treatments between sets of data. So we're just trying to see if there's correlation or relationship between the two. Let's say, for example, the time spent by students on social media versus their mathematical test scores. So let's try to see if there is correlation between these two, and there are many tools to study that, but we didn't introduce any control or manipulation on our subject in this study. So dito po, the experimental research is what we're gonna talk about today, and it's the type of quantitative research that determines causal relationship. So cause and effect po yung dinidiscuss natin dito. So you have independent variables which you manipulate or control and measure the outcome on the dependent variable. So yun po yung i-discuss natin today. And there's also another type of quantitative research, the quasi-experimental research. It also investigates causal relationship, but there is no random assignment on the experimental subjects. This is the case when the subjects are pre-existing already. So let's take, for example, the same example na you're trying to see the test scores of students in a certain school versus those from another school, and correlate that with the time spent on social media, and let's see if there is a causal relationship. Let's say if we try to implement like a certain time for social media, let's say, okay, magbabad kayo ng 3 oras dyan, and then let's see what your test scores will be. Or let's say, for example, if you are trying to test the efficacy of a certain teaching method, so you implement that teaching method to different sets of students, let's say from one school to another, and they're already existing, and you did not randomly assign the subjects to those groups. So ang nature po nung research na yun is quasi-experimental because you didn't choose among yourself, you didn't do randomization on the subject, on the composition of the groups. So they're existing already. Okay? But what we're going to talk about today is experimental research. And the experimental design is the process of organizing the experiments to ensure that the right amount and type of data is available to answer the research question as clearly and as efficiently as possible. So we have already developed a research question and laid out our research objectives. Now, that experimental design will try to answer and try to cater each one of those research objectives as clearly and as efficiently as possible. So I've written here that the right amount and type of data, because we are limited by our resources, our time, and of course budget. So we try to make do with what we have. So with our limited resources. So I summarize this in this diagram. So yun nga po, we have the research question, the research aim and objectives, and your experimental design is your actual tool. So parang there's a task and you need a tool, let's say martilyo or wrench. So yun yung tool mo to tackle your research aim and objectives point by point. Okay? So in science investigatory projects or capstone projects in universities and high schools, the experimental design normally states what methodologies were chosen and explain why these choices were made. So sometimes explicitly they will state this in the final paper kung bakit yung methodologies yung napili and ano yung research question that they're trying to address. And they should be when we're writing the methodology part, so sasabihin ng mga teachers that try to be as detailed as possible. And that's because the experimental methodology must be descriptive enough to be reproduced and verified by another group of people or another person, another experimenter. So sa ating mga teachers, let us train our students to be really detailed on the methodology part. Kung ano yung ginawa natin, what is the room temperature, the humidity in the room where the experiment was tested, para we have a basis for any discrepancies or any abnormal results kapag reproduce yung ating experiments by another set of people or another location. So the experimental design in SIP has these steps involved. So yun na nga po, we define our research question and variables, and we write down our hypothesis. So yung sa tinatanong kanina, kailangan ba explicitly sinasabi yung hypothesis? Sometimes hindi explicitly, but it's somehow expressed in the introduction implicitly na parang ito yung tinitest natin and ito yung mga variables na tinitingnan. Okay? And then, you design your experimental treatments. So, dito ka na magde-determine what levels of the treatment you want to implement on your study. And of course, the final step in experimental design is the execution or the actual measurements and data collection. So these steps actually constitute a controlled, what's called a controlled experiment. And this should be systematically and accurately manipulate the independent variables. Let's say yung dosage ng active ingredient, the temperature of the reaction, let's say implemented, and the pH of the reaction solution, for example. And precisely measure the dependent variables kasi pag minsan dito tayo nagkakamali dun sa pag-measure ng mga qualities. Let's say pH or temperature, mali yung thermometer na ginamit, mali yung instrument or the instrument is faulty. So we should give provision to precisely collect the data or measure the data from our subjects and control any potential source of interferences, because this may not be very apparent, but there might be what is called confounding variables na pwedeng maka-apekto ng ating mga ng ating mga resulta, because interferences are always there. That's why meron tayong systematic and random errors na tinatawag. But we try as much as possible to control the effects of these interferences. And let me just stop sharing and give an example. I just found this in the web. This is a study published in PubliScience. I think this is a local journal in the Western Visayas. So marami pong sources of articles na free out there in the Philippines. So kung gusto po nating mag-check, so there's PubliScience, there's the Philippine Journal of Science. Just to contextualize our research, kung para po makita natin what are the ongoing research in our areas. For example, this one is in Western Visayas in Iloilo. Na napakasimpleng experiment lang po. This is done by high school students, and they are trying to see if there is an effect of this powdered chicken eggshells as soil additive on the growth of Vigna radiata. So very sophisticated po, pero munggo lang po ito, mung bean plant. So they are insinuating that the calcium in the chicken eggshells will have an effect on the growth of the vegetative growth of the mung bean plant. And they have set this out. They stated this in the introduction. So they have narrowed down their research objectives. So very simple lang na i-measure yung stalk length and the root length of the plant as a function of the composition of the soil, meaning to say the amount of the eggshells that they have incorporated in the soil. So measure the stalk length, the root, and then ito po yung method. So very simple lang din. They treated the soil samples with different concentrations, and then administered the same amount of water to all the subjects. And then after 30 days, chinek po nila yung mga measurements. Doon sila nag-measure. I think they have measured in between days. Yeah, 10 days, 20 days, 30 days. So, ayan po. Makikita natin kung ano yung, let us try to develop the habit of reading journal articles to have an idea on how this is done at the national level or yung professional level, para ma-expose din po yung mga students natin on the language of how scientific articles are written. So, yung level of detail and of course, in terms of experimental methodology, there is a considerate amount of detail that you can put there. So hindi naman kailangan lahat, but enough detail so that it can be reproducible or can be repeated by another person or group. So ang kanilang measurement ay ginawa using an app. So this is not a standard instrument. So, but they also used a vernier caliper. But somehow, when we're using non-standard methods for measurement, somehow kailangan nating i-validate or try to cross-check that with standard instrument or samples, if available. Probably itong mga estudyante na to were just really techy. That's why they use their phone to measure those. But well, probably a simple ruler or meter would do the job. So this is just one example on how the experimental methodology is configured. So let me just go back to my slide. Yan. So, when we're talking about experimental design, there are hard skills that can be developed or must be developed in order to come up with a very sound and fit for purpose experimental design. And three of those is the design of experiments, the experimental control, and the analytical techniques. So yung analytical techniques, sinabi ko lang na hard skill siya kasi kapag nakapili na tayo ng analytical method, let's say titration, pH measurements, or let's say metal analysis by some standard methods. So it goes to say na ituturo natin sa mga estudyante yun. So they must be able to do them by themselves and understand the the theory behind that analytical technique on how it's able to measure that specific trait or that specific quality of the sample. So automatic na po yun sa mga estudyante natin to learn these analytical techniques, and I hope that our teachers will guide them through it, or at least find an expert on the field of these analytical techniques para po maituro yung standard methods sa mga estudyante natin, and inculcate and try to establish in them na we always need to use standard methods as much as possible, because standard methods are reliable and valid. So I also have here a design of experiments and experimental control, which I will discuss in detail. So ito pong design of experiments is a research strategy invented by Ronald Fisher in 1958, and Doc Jeff already discussed this in one of our webinars in Research University. But this is a very useful tool para po ma-optimize natin yung mga resources natin. So it involves a systematic planning prior to conducting an experimental campaign or experimental study. And this aims to study as many data points from a minimum number of experiments. So we try to optimize the number of experiments in order to get as much data points or get as much information with a limited number of experiments. Kasi most of the time we are limited by our budget or time, kasi nga yung research project ng mga estudyante ay limited lang within 1 year yung experimentation. So that's why they really need to finish within a certain time frame. And yeah, of course, these are very crucial kapag limited po yung budget natin and kailangan natin magtipid. Yeah. So the way this design of experiments work is we try to set bookend values to our different experimental variables. So in this case, I'm just giving this example on the preparation of gold nanoparticles using different experimental conditions. Bakit nakaano yung kamay ko? Ayan, so we have different variables
that we have.
The precursor or the reagents here, when we're trying to synthesize gold nanoparticles, you have a precursor. So this is this gold precursor over here, and then our reductant. So medyo nagpapaka-hardcore na tayo. This is the chemicals part, the concentration of the chemicals, the temperature of the reaction, and the pH. So you have three variables. So what we try to do when we carry out design of experiments is that we take bookend values from each of those variables. So let's say the concentration ratio, lowest to highest is 0.5 to 2.5. So, nandito po yan. So this is the concentration ratio. And then you have the temperature axis, right over here. And then the pH axis on that side. Yeah, the z-axis. Yeah, 4 versus 9. So you have 3 variables, and then you take the lowest and the highest value for each of those set of conditions. So you have a total of 8 experiments here if we do like the combination of those 3 variables. So you carry out those 8 experiments and try to see which experimental condition will give the highest yield. So in this case, itong condition na to, this condition B, gave the highest yield of 75%. So already, we have an idea on what the ideal experimental conditions will be when we're trying to come up with as much high yield of gold nanoparticles. So, magpe-play around na lang po tayo dito sa experimental values na to. So, and at this point, we've already narrowed down the number of our experiments. If we try to do the experiment with different temperatures and concentrations, we can go on and perform a lot of experiments, while in fact, we can just focus our resources along these ideal conditions. So in that way, we have already narrowed down and cut our time for experiments and cut the costs for reagents and instruments for this experiment. So ganun lang po ginagawa yung design of experiments. And if you want to learn more on how this is done, how this is implemented in your research studies, then you can probably visit our website and just type in design of experiments there. So Doc Jeff did a very nice job in explaining this. I can probably, he can probably explain this better. Yeah.
Well, actually, I would just like to build on what JP said. So he raised a very important point po that, ito, consider nyo po ito sa Pilipinas kasi sinabi nga po ni JP, you can come up with the most elaborate plan with, di ba, and typically kasi ang ginagawa po natin, napaka-linear ng approach. Two variables at a time ang ina-explore nyo. One dependent and one independent variable. Pero kapag po ang study nyo ay merong 3, 4 o 5 magkakaibang variables na naaaralin nyo, unang-una po, kung kulang kayo sa oras at kung kulang kayo sa gamit, you don't have to work all too hard and exhaust or deplete your resources. Sometimes you just have to work smart and extrapolate. And this is what JP just taught you is a way to accelerate, like your learning in this space. And ang nangyayari po kasi dito is, for example, out of 8 experiments, kung nakita mo na the most important variables are variables A and B, then pwede ka naman mag-focus doon. Pwede mong i-refine yun to better understand it.
Yes, so this is a very important tool for practicality's sake. Okay? Another hard skill, so we go back to the hard skills that we can develop for experimental design, is experimental control. And this is because our experimental design must ensure that the measurements or the data that we collect are reliable and valid to a certain extent. I say at a certain extent because we are limited, of course, by our resources and just dive deep, go to a certain depth of experimentation on a certain research question. So kung limited po tayo sa budget, hindi natin ma-afford yung mga sophisticated equipment, so we do like in-house developed methods. So we try to aim at least so that our measurements and our data are reliable and valid, and minimizing the errors or the bias in the experiments. So there are two metrics here, the reliability and the validity of the experiments. And reliability is, the measure for reliability is found on the reproducibility of a certain analytical method implemented. So yung results ng experiments natin must be reproducible in order to be deemed reliable. So kung inulit ito ng iba pang grupo or ng iba pang estudyante the year after, doon mapuprove na reliable yung ating method or analytical technique na ginamit. And also, the methods, the methodology should be valid. And how do we ensure that the methodology is valid? We use validated or standard methods. Let's say when we're doing meta-analysis, so ang standard method po dyan usually is what is called atomic absorption spectroscopy or AAS, or ICP, inductively coupled plasma spectroscopy. These are already sophisticated equipment, sophisticated instrumentation na pwede natin i-employ so that we know that these are valid, and whenever methods are valid, we know that they are reliable. So it comes hand in hand. So pag valid po yung methods natin, you know that it's reliable, but it's not the other way around. Parang hindi ibig sabihin na yung in-house developed method natin for metal analysis, just because it's reliable, nare-reproduce natin yung results, it means that it's valid. It doesn't follow. But whenever we use standard methods, we are sure that the results are reliable and valid as well. And another aspect of experimental control is that subjects must be randomized into treatment groups. Kasi nga po, we are trying to minimize the errors or the bias in our experiments. So dito na po pumapasok yung bias ng experimenter or bias ng methodology itself. When you're trying to do calibration from the lowest concentration to the highest concentration, in that manner, from lowest to high, you already introduce a bias on the actual measurement. So that's why randomization is important. Let's say we control our subjects or randomize our subjects into the treatment groups para po ma-minimize yung errors and bias. So, and of course, a control group must be maintained. Yung control group po is the group that did not receive any treatment or manipulation or control in the treatments. So ito yung untreated sample natin. So let me just come back to my example over here. Ayan po. So, sinasabi po nila dito na yung blocking of the plants were, dito pa rin po tayo sa eggshell example. They treated the plants with different concentrations of the chicken eggshells, but they randomized the blocking of the plants every day. Kasi nga po, yung effect ng sunlight might introduce a bias on the plants. Kasi nga po baka yung isang group ang mas naaarawan kaysa doon sa kapila. So we try to randomize the samples so that they receive an unbiased amount of, let's say, a certain confounding variable. Confounding variable na po ito kasi hindi naman nila uh, uh, tinalakay yung effect ng sunlight dun sa growth ng plants. It's just the amount of this active ingredient. So ganun po yung pag-carry out ng randomization, and umapasok na din po dito yung randomized block approach ng mga experiments natin, where we try to randomize our subjects into treatment groups, and we discussed that thoroughly during the design of experiments webinar in the research university. We will send the link after the webinar here. So I want to stress again that control group must be maintained at all times, kasi ang ganda-ganda nung experimentation, pagdating sa defense, wala palang control. So that actually happened sa in my experience. So parang ang ganda-ganda nung discussion, but then nakita nung reviewer at examiner, wala kang control. So ulit tayo. So that's why it's really important that we devote an ample amount of time towards the development of a sound experimental design, kasi nga po we may suffer in the end.
And actually, matatawag ko si JP. Ang tawagan po namin ni JP because we've been friends for how long, JP? More than about 20 years.
I don't know, 20 years.
About 20 years. Anyways, matatawag ko siyang Dong. Anyways. Force of habit. Pero singitan na natin to ng chikahan. Kasi po, importance of control experiments. Magkaiba po yan, may negative and positive control. Why is this very important? We have the tendency to not control things when the result is positive. Meaning, yung ini-expect natin na kukuha natin. Mm-hmm. But then, as researchers, let's make it a practice that when something is working out well, is that real? Kasi ang sinabi, yes.
O ba yan?
Yes. Ang sinabi ako ni JP, nangyayari na ang ganda-ganda ng resulta mo, pero if you are not really able to establish or you establish the confidence that that is not a result of something that is interfering in your experiments, baka po ang mangyayari sa dulo ay mali pa yung resulta.
Mm-hmm.
At napakasakit pong mangyayari yan sa dulo ng thesis pagpatapos na kayo.
Isang taon na ang nangyari.
At may-extend kayo.
Hindi ka gagraduate.
Yeah. Doon sa experience namin, parang okay, ang taas-taas ng concentration na nakuha nila. Yung pala, yung temperature ng hot plate, hindi equal. So, mas mataas yung temperature dun sa likod. So, so those are unforeseen, confounding variables na tinatawag. Kaya, we really have to...
I also had a recent experience there. Ang nangyari was I took over a project and I couldn't reproduce the result. So I had to do things, I had to rerun the experiment 3 times and I kept getting the same outcome. And then, yung taong gumawa po ng experiment, medyo wala na siya dun sa group namin. So when we did some further digging from of what they did 3 or 4 years ago, it turns out magkaiba yung mga hot plate na ginamit, magkaiba yung mga glassware na ginamit, certain things that were not documented and variables that could really impact the outcome. Dong, sagutin ko lang itong isang tanong dito. Sir Tony, meron po kaming webinar from the Institute of Statistics in UP. They actually came up, kay Professor Lara, it's about experimental design. She discussed CRD and RCBD.
Yeah.
Puntahan niyo po yun doon.
Yeah, the statistical treatment of data. So, ayun po, very detailed po yung discussion ni Ma'am Lara from that webinar. So you can just search that from our website. Okay. So ito, papasok na po tayo.
Okay, and that's the end of the discussion about methodology. So I hope that you will apply those practical skills on crafting your methods and materials.
Mental design.
And for your output, you will collaborate with your SIP group and write your methodology. So you will also provide yourself with your logbook. You will answer the guide questions in your logbook. You will document everything starting from the planning of your processes and the materials that you will use on your logbook. So your logbook is your partner in planning all of these things. Okay? So that's the end of our discussion for today. Good luck in your methodology writing. God bless everyone.